All right, everybody, and David, you're on spotlight now. So I'd like to introduce our next guest on, David Lipscomb. David has worked pretty close with USA Cycling over the last few months in our D&I efforts, that's diversity, equality, and inclusion efforts, and has provided just some great advice to us as an organization. And he spoke to our leadership team a month or two ago, and after that, I really thought this would be a great thing for our community. David and I have talked a little about bias. He's going to talk about diversity today. I don't want to steal all his thunder there. But as we talked about yesterday, there's bias built in the sport. We had the discussion with Noreen. She's, David, so you know, is one of our top commissaires and is working as the chief official for the Olympic track and is really the first commissaire to do that. And the biases for her as a female in a very male-dominated sport, especially Eurocentric. So we've seen a little of this. Yeah. And David's going to address that. I want to talk a little about David's background, which is pretty impressive. David spent a career as a corporate executive in banking and finance. Also has a pretty impressive resume in martial arts with an advanced level black belt degree and 2 brown belts in different disciplines, so we don't want to mess with him. He took his experience in the business world, that training, and other leadership developed and created CIS training system cycling program. And what David's done is found ways to combine the science of cycling, the art of coaching, and principles of leadership development. I'm going to say he walks the talk. He's the first cycling coach in the world to demo Zwift. So he's been really ahead of things on that. He's one of the first documented virtual coaches with cycling programs for Zwift. He's a Bicycling Magazine membership coach and content creator. And I think this is the most impressive out of the close to 94,000 athletes on Strava. He's ranked 144th in popularity. So he knows what he's talking about. David, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you. And I think you have a presentation to put up. You've got co-host ability, and we'll be here to help and assist.
All right, that works. Thanks, Chuck, for the kind words. Happy Sunday, folks. Happy Sunday. Throw your thumbs up if you have a happy Sunday. All right, that's good. I like to hear that. All right, where are we going to start? I mean, we could talk along the lines of diversity and inclusion and biases. And we're going to talk about those things, but I think what we need to do is we got to come to an understanding of really what it is and what it's not. So I'm going to put up a presentation, and we're going to go through this conversation and more based around the human condition of really what diversity and inclusion is and how it actually impacts you as an official. So I'll put this up here real quick for us. And give me 1 second. I will share my screen. 1 sec. All this is going. Give me 1 second, folks. Chuck, help me out with this one.
You want me to just drive for you, David?
Yeah, you drive, I'll talk. How's that?
That works for me. I will be able to get this up and getting it up right now.
Oh, Beans, thank you, buddy. Appreciate you. I just have you go through the slides from that perspective, which is actually easier for me to talk through anyway.
All right, you're good to go now.
All right, appreciate it. Once again, I'm Coach David Lipscomb, CIS Training System Cycling Program. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself. Actually go back to the last slide and kind of go down through the discussion points that we're going to talk about. So first, you're gonna get to know who I am and understand kind of what my modus operandi is as it relates to this type of work. We'll also talk about what is diversity and truly what it's not. And I think where you're going to see in what I want to discuss with the group today is that there's this thought process that people kind of get locked into when they hear the word diversity, but I'm going to show you a broader perspective of really what it truly is. Number 3, we'll talk about understanding what bias actually is. And then what Chuck just shared with you folks on the line was, there are certain things that you discussed yesterday, but how do we best understand what bias is and how do we move forward or we move past that? And also tips to reduce the amount of bias that we have as individuals. Next slide, Chuck. So when we look at the whole broad scheme of things, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself, okay? So I'm a cycling coach, but I think a lot of what I do that's so unique and special is the fact that I develop people. So it comes from my HR background of the work that I've done, over the 15 years of my corporate experience, is I see it from a psychological perspective that in order for us to continue to move what we do and to perform at the levels that we want to perform at, there's a level of development that needs to happen as it relates to quote unquote training. Okay, so we'll talk more in depth and detail where that's concerned. My background is competitive performance. So I think what's unique, what I do is I focus on not just the high level of individuals. I focus on the people who are just learning how to ride their bikes to Masters World Championships or Masters World Champions. I think the unique thing that I created in this program is an integrative approach to training. So what Chuck was talking about, all of these experiences that I've had from a diversity standpoint, business development, training, HR, martial arts, I've all put into this type of program that deals with the individual from soup to nuts. Because if we're looking for performance, if we can't break down, once again, those barriers that impede performance, how good can we be? Or how great can we be, okay? The fourth piece is I'm an HR professional at trade. But I think what my core competence is I'm a diversity executive and consultant. So when it comes to the work that I'm doing with USA Cycling, I'm a strategist as relates to how does the work of diversity truly tie into the business? Because that's the most important thing. And how does it impact overall human condition? And also, I'm a black belt. Okay, so don't mess with me. I'm just playing. This is a joke. Okay, next slide. So once again, what does Coach David know about diversity? Well, I'll show you. And next slide, Chuck. So as Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion, now I'm going to throw this, take this look at this holistically for a moment. When I was working as Diversity and Inclusion as Vice President in a large financial services firm, from 2005 to 2009, we are talking about the same things now that I was talking about in 2005. Why has that not changed? Or has it changed? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that kind of concept around where we were during that time and where we are today, and how does it relate to how do we move people from where they are today, understanding themselves, to understanding others. Specifically, if you're a professional or an official, is to understand how to move past that and understand each other. Number two, so when you think about the background that I have, as a diversity strategic strategist, a lot of what I did within the confines of corporate America was I was able to create these types of strategies that really moved not just the organization, but also individuals to better serve themselves, to understand themselves, to help other people grow and understand innovation. So from 2009, Congress of Diversity Executive Leadership and Diversity Awards, based on mentoring programs. And I know that one thing that USAC is trying to figure out is mentor programs are key to helping people move. Okay, I'm a Six Sigma green belt. I'm kind of driven in process improvement, because in order for us to move from where we are from a performance standpoint, we have to have a process to go from soup to nuts. So it's just not the age old, here's how it was, back in the day. Everything has to have a process. So when you look at my program, it's about a system. Everybody understands systems. And I've been featured in New York Times and Diversity Executive and Business Week. Okay, whatever. Next slide, Chuck. Okay, so what is diversity? So let's talk diversity. So next slide. So let's give you the 30,000-foot view of what this actual word means. But when we think about the word diversity, we all get caught up in a couple key things, a couple key concepts that we can't seem to get out of what we've been hearing over the news, especially now because of the certain things that are happening in a social perspective. But I want to go a little bit broader and help people see more. There's more here than what we are looking at. Okay, so from the concepts of diversity, a lot of these links to social justice with diversity in the discussion, that's exactly where we are. So when we look back in 2005, when I was doing this work, we're still talking about the same things because it's the human condition of getting people to move forward or move past what their quote unquote biases are. For me, the simplest term for diversity is the difference. It's the difference between each other. but it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And how you best leverage that difference is what makes the difference. Next slide, Chuck. So for me, diversity is in any dimension can be used to differentiate groups from people from another. So it's the difference is where the innovation happens, where the difference happens, where the concepts of dialogue actually can move from where it was today or where it can be tomorrow and the next day. Okay, next slide. So let's talk diversity. So before I go to this next slide, Chuck, if you could help me out here and either yourself or some other folks within the people who you know personally or want to kind of step up and actually help me create this scenario as I'm about to paint for each other in this concept. So next slide. So when we think diversity, what do we talk about? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Chuck, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Sorry, I was on mute, David. Race.
Yeah. We all talk about that all the time. When we hear the word diversity, we talk about race all the time. But when we look at the slide, we see that there's so many pieces to this puzzle that it's just not about gender and race, folks. Look at all the things that we can talk about here. We could talk about recreational habits. We could talk about marital habits. We could talk about organizational role. We can also talk about physical qualities and abilities. We could talk about gender. We could talk about race. We could talk about all these things that make up the individual from a diversity perspective. But if we're only caught in the mindset of gender and race, we can't get past where we need to go. So give me an example there, Chuck. So if we were to pick two in the internal components of the diversity wheel, which are the inside pieces and the outside pieces, let's pick one or two, what would you select? What would you say?
You want me to pick one or two on the middle, David?
Say that again?
You want me to do one or two in the middle?
Do one in the middle and two on the outside.
I'm going to do gender, thinking styles, and personal habits.
Okay, so describe those pieces. Why would you just select those?
Well, it's some of this is just because what we talked about yesterday. It's top of my mind, quite frankly. But personal habits and I think thinking styles are, especially the thinking styles, to me is something right now in society. I mean, there's a lot of different thoughts right now on politics and government, pandemic, COVID, everything else. And to me, realizing that people don't all think the same, even in my neighborhood, is important.
Right. So let's open it up to a couple more other folks within the call. If everyone wants to kind of put their thumb up, and let's talk through this. So a reason why I'm going to highlight this slide is, until we understand really what diversity is, we can't talk about bias. It's difficult to talk about bias if we don't understand there are more components to this process. So who wants to put their thumb up and talk about it?
Can I volunteer somebody?
Sure, you sure can. I like that.
Steve Cruz has put some stuff in chat, and I'm going to volunteer Steve Cruz.
All right, Steve, break it down. Tell me something.
Tell you something about what? Thinking style or personal habits?
Or no, one thing in the internal component of diversity in the diversity wheel, and maybe two other things on the outside that pertain to you specifically, pertain to you.
Okay. In the internal side, there's I'll think about age. Many of the officials I now work with are much younger than me because I am so much older than they are. Okay. But it's a good thing. It's a good way to recognize that you can learn still from those younger than you. If you have younger officials or middle-aged officials or older officials on the crew working together, it brings a real wealth of experience, of knowledge, of different ways to do things. On the outside of the wheel, I think of sometimes military experience is one that sometimes is overlooked. Many of our people that can make really good judges tend to be people like engineers or those with military experience, very structured. And those that don't have that experience, maybe they might be better suited to be a referee rather than a judge. Right. So as we look at these different kinds of categories, education or thinking style, or you have to be able to adapt and adjust to the team that you're working with, no matter what particular silo you want to put people in. I think at the end of the day, it's not about the silos that we're in, it's about the officials that we are. And surely the diversity component is there, but in the end, we end up all being on the same team. I hope that helps.
No, that was spot on. That was so spot on, because that covers the whole gamut of the whole conversation. But I like your idea around the military experience, because the structure of a military person is key based around being an official, because it's about process, right? It's about the process to ensure that there's no ambiguity, right? Right. So it is what it is. So this is why we have.
I'm laughing about ambiguity.
It's like so true. It's so true. It's like, so we got to figure out, get rid of the gray area and come up with the real brass tacks of the conversation. Who won and who didn't win? You came in 35th, or is it 34th place? Well, let's look at the data. Let's look at the process here. So that's just great. That's just great. Thank you, Steve, for that. Give me two more people there, Chuck.
I'm going to let anybody who wants step up and.
I'll go, Chuck.
All right.
This is Ben here in New York.
Hey.
David, good to see you.
You as well. New York, it's snowing here.
I'm up in the Catskills. It's snowing very heavy up here. So
nice to meet you, buddy. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So I will go with the big elephant in the room. I will take race. And in terms of my experience within USAC and officiating events, I live upstate New York, so there's obviously less diversity up here than in New York City. Most of my events I've been north of. Yes. So the reason I bring this up is because I go to events and I love cycling. I love interacting with the athletes and other officials. But there is a great disparity of lack of representation there of African Americans or Latinos and so on and so forth. Usually find myself maybe one or two African American officials, or maybe two or three other African American athletes, right? Mm-hmm. And that becomes very obvious. So I think, we need to do something to improve that. Right. On the flip side, I was terribly excited when I did my first of two events in New York City at the Harlem Crit.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, and
incredible.
That was incredible. It was like a party. It was exciting. There was like music, lively, and I was like, wow, this is not a cycling event at all. It's like a big community event. So that to me sticks out because I'm always, wherever I do these events, I'm always sort of sticking out like, oh, it's not in a bad way. It's just that it's so obvious that there's lack of representation.
Absolutely.
So I think we need to figure out a way to address that. Maybe yesterday we talked about the youth events, the cycling camps and stuff like that. Those kind of things can help develop the next generation of cyclists to young people in African American communities to emulate. And I think that would go a long way to developing and making the sport more inclusive.
Right, absolutely. And the interesting thing you're talking about, Ben, is this, back when I was doing my consulting work. So I'll just go back. So CIS Training Systems really is a spinoff of my consulting practice, which I do consulting for diversity as well. So I work with USA Swimming with that specific thing, was creating this level of access where we can create the opportunity to get more people within the sport of color, right, for color. And I think one of the challenges that we're faced with right now is the fact that what access do we truly have? You know, when we say, you know, what's the entry level opportunity to buy a bicycle? A lot of the bike shops or bike manufacturers are having a difficult time because of COVID, especially now, is what price point do they put it at? And how expensive is it to really get into this sport? So I think that that's where the change and where the rub kind of happens to really partner with the right organizations to help build this holistic approach to bring more people of color into the sport. Now, when you said exactly where the Harlem Crit is concerned, folks, if you have an opportunity to come to a Harlem Crit, and hopefully it'll happen this year because I spoke to the presenter of it or the promoter of it just a couple of days ago. If it happens this year, you should come just check it out. It's the most amazing thing you'll ever experience. It is truly a big party. It's truly a big party. But it really gives you an opportunity to see that there's so much talent out there that's untapped. Truth be told, Ben. You know what I'm saying? So go ahead. You were going to say something, Ben?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah. But thank you for that. So is there anything else you want to have on the others outside of that? The diversity wheel?
I guess that will go along with like geographic location, which sort of ties into, you know, where people live and so on and so forth. What should I say? I don't see you, I think, addressed that access to the equipment, you know, things like that.
So thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate your words. One more person, maybe one or two. What do you think, Chuck? What we got?
So don't make me call on anybody, Bonnie.
Come on, Bonnie. What you got there?
Yeah, actually, I was actually going to volunteer. So
Hi, Bonnie.
So I think one of the things that resonates for me, especially as an official on the inside of the wheel, is the physical qualities and abilities. And I'm going to tie that to kind of job classification, but I'm going to look at job classification more from a rider perspective.
Good point.
You know, we talked about the collegiate stuff earlier, and I think one of the most rewarding events for me to work as an official has been with the paracycling community.
Okay.
So we tend to view people, whether they're cyclists or in some other capacity, that if we see where they have a physical limitation, we may or may not think of them as being able to do the job or the activity that others can. And I think from the paracycling stuff, I think that's a misnomer, because if anybody has ever worked a paracycling event, it is amazing. And if you ever get the chance, I highly recommend it, just to see how these true athletes are. And similar to the collegiate experience, I mean, everybody's in it for everybody, right? So everybody's cheering for everyone. And it proves that just because a rider gets up on the track that may only have one arm and one leg on the same side of his body, it's a sight to see, and the ability that they have to perform and exceed what our expectations are.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, because that just goes to show the power of diversity, the power of it, that there's no limitation here.
Yeah, it wasn't really a job classification, but I couldn't really think of where else to put that. But I mean, it's still important, because, you know, if he was applying for a job as a professional cyclist or something, you may not think he would have that ability.
That's right. That's right. And I think on the other hand, from a recruitment standpoint, is getting the recruiter to look past that. Mm-hmm. You know, and look past the level of bias that they might have. I mean, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes, of just opening up and looking at the broader perspective of it. So I appreciate what you're sharing, and I think that resonates with a lot of people here in this call, that it's more than what we're thinking. It's more than what we thought from the time that we talked about the word diversity. There's just so many pieces to this puzzle. But once we put all these pieces together, there's so much quality and content around the individual that helps us see how can we really relate and move this needle, whatever that needle is for the individual, but it's really unique. So thank you for sharing that, Bonnie. Thank you. Thank you. I think we can move forward. What do you think, Chuck?
I agree.
Let's go. So what are diversity blind spots? Now, before I go to the next slide, so you're in a car and you're driving, and there's certain blind spots that you see or that you don't see while you're driving. Diversity is kind of the same thing. It's there are things that we don't necessarily see that might be right in front of us that we're not quite looking at. So when we look at the next slide, diversity blind spots are missed opportunities linked to diverse individuals or community, right? So now as officials, let's talk about the community, right? And what Ben was talking about also is the ability to create more inclusion in those levels of communities if we're not creating the opportunity to bring more people into the space to bring more community, because community is important, especially now. I mean, you think about COVID and all the type of things that we're going through now, is how do we build a better community of people, okay? Number two is uncovering personal biases or prejudices when diversity blind spots are essential for improving diversity intelligence. So when we talk about the diversity intelligence, it's creating this ability to say, all right, where am I at personally? And how can I see what the next individual is, and how can I create this connection between myself and the individual, and how can I learn from that? So that I get smarter about how do I behave, because diversity is also about behavior. Bias is about behavior too. So the last piece is diversity intelligence involves people understanding each other and moving past that. Because for me, tolerance is not good enough, okay? We can all tolerate having bad behavior, but that's not, we want to move past that and embrace the differences of people so that we can continue to keep moving, that we're not talking about the things we talked about in 2005. That was how many years ago? That was 16 years ago that I worked in that space, and we're still talking about the same things. But until we address the question around the human condition, around the individual first, how can we move this needle forward? So let's move forward there, Chuck. So understanding biases. Well, let's explore how to address these biases to make you more of an inclusive official, so, and more of a better person, an inclusive person. So let's move forward. What is implicit bias or unconscious bias? They're the same. So, implicit and unconscious are the same. So we'll talk about these similarities between the two on the next slide. So when we look at this implicit bias or unconscious association, belief, or attitude towards a social group. So I'm gonna say one word, and Chuck, I'll have you join me with this one. If I say peanut butter, you'll say what?
Chocolate.
If I say peanut butter, you'll say what?
Peanut butter.
Jelly.
Jelly, no.
You'll say jelly.
Not a jelly guy, David.
That's it. You'll say jelly, because it's about association.
I'm biased against jelly.
There you go. There you go. See, so it's understanding that there are certain similarities, and when people see certain things, they assimilate to certain things because of where they're from or how they grew up, right? So like for me, if someone said Kool-Aid, I'd say sugar, right? Because you got to put sugar in Kool-Aid, right? So they're connected to each other. So it's understanding and making these assessments involuntarily outside of intentional control that affects the behavior, that affects the level of behavior, how we deal with people. So until we understand what those areas, those intentional areas are, because it's in your brain. It's not a bad thing. Everybody has it. Everybody has it. It's actually scientific, and people have done research about it, that it's more than just about talking about the gender and race conversation that have happened over the years. Now it's about what are those involuntary intentions that we have that aren't necessarily bad, but until we understand what they are, can we address them if we don't know what they are, if we don't address those things, okay? Deb, we'll get back to that question, but that's a great question. I think that just popped up, and Chuck, we'll go back to Deb's question, okay? All right. So next slide. So how to reduce this implicit bias? Implicit bias impacts the behavior. So when we look at these certain things, I'll just kind of highlight these two pieces on the slide, is focus on seeing people as individuals. Just focus on seeing them where they are, meet them where they are. So I kind of go back to my martial arts experiences when I was a white belt, and then I transitioned, from white belt, green belt, white belt, yellow belt, green belt, brown belt to black belt. When I got to brown belt, I had to go back and teach white belts. So I had to meet them where they were, right? I couldn't share with them, oh, look at the techniques that you should learn as a brown belt. They would not even know that. So kind of the same principle here is focus on seeing people as individuals where they are, okay? It doesn't make it bad, doesn't make it good. It is what it is, okay? Number two is work on consciously changing your stereotype. So it's kind of, there's certain things when I call it the human condition or the value spectrum. We all grew up where we grew up. We all have conditions, the things that we've learned from experiences as we grew up. But certain things that are within those biases are deeply rooted in how we behave. And it's not a bad thing. It is just what it is. It's just what it is. But until we understand what they are, we can't address those things if we don't know what they are so we can move them forward. So consciously adjust the response. So as it relates to, I think what Stephen said is really unique. In order for us to see how to become better officials, we have to address the process. We have to address it first, so that we can all come into communication and understand each other from the ground perspective before we move it forward, before it gets too complicated in the process. Next slide. Take time and pause to reflect, which I think is one of the unique things and the most important things is just take a step back, okay, and reduce those reflective reactions. I think when people say certain things, we automatically react instead of thinking. Why did that person say what they said? Okay, let's take a step back and say, all right, why do you think that? Why do you think the person is thinking the way that they're thinking? So instead of reacting so quickly, let's just take a step back and look at the bigger picture here. Why is this person or this group saying things that they're saying? How can I take my thought processes and kind of map those map those pieces together continuously so that we can move to a positive response. I think that's one of the key pieces to the slide is understanding how to take that pause instead of reacting so quickly, okay? Which adjusts your perspective, because once again, we all come from a different perspective. We all have this ability to look at things from our own perspective, but adjust where we are. And in order for us to adjust where we are, we also have to take the step back first to actually see it. Next slide. Increase your exposure. You know, find different groups of people that you would not necessarily be around, so that you can kind of take a step back and kind of look at the big picture here and take kind of those copious notes, I call them. That why is this group acting the way that they're acting? Why is this individual acting the way that they're acting? Or why do they do things the way that they do them? Not necessarily saying that you have to agree with it, but just kind of take a look at it and look to see exactly where they're at, and why this level of community does what it does. So once again, like what Ben was saying, when you go to this race in Harlem, it's just a whole totally different environment than what most races would be, because it's more based around the community, not just about the bike race. So why is that the way that it is? It's history. I think that race is like 60 years old. It's incredible, just how they created certain things. And the last piece will be practice mindfulness. Okay, and not saying we have to do touch hands and hold hands all day, but to just take time to take a step back and reflect on the breathing and increase the mindfulness in your thought process to just do a higher level of self. And I think all of these pieces, and this will be the last slide, is how do we take all of these pieces around bias, understand ourselves before we then can understand other people. So last slide. Questions and answers.
And I'll pull up some that were in chat, David.
Sure.
One that Deb brought up was, how do we deal with people with biases not coming from us, but coming from other? And she's the example of, we're an official, and athletes certainly have biases against us. And we've heard the term, blue-shirted fun sucker a couple of times. So what's your advice on that?
Oh, wow. I think that's a really great question. So say the question again. I'm gonna try to get this.
What happens when biases are coming from others towards us as officials?
Okay. So it, for the, I have to go, it has to go back to the individual first. As an official, you're doing the best job possible to ensure that that's equitable and the results are where they are. So from a response perspective, I wouldn't take it personal, because the individual themselves have to take a look at themselves and why they're acting the way that they're acting towards you or towards any official. I mean, being an official is just a hard job anyway, because everybody's looking at you saying, okay, well, you have to be on top of your A game all the time. And you do, because it is what it is. But I wouldn't so much take it personal. Yeah, I wouldn't take it personal. That's how I would answer that question. I wouldn't take it too personal. I would just understand where they're coming from, show the data on how they place within the race, and show them the process. Reiterate the process, because it is a process. And then hopefully they can look at themselves and say, okay, how did I act towards this official? Maybe I can change the way that I react and not deal with officials the way that I've dealt with officials before. That's my thought for that. But good question though, really good question. Hopefully I answered that for you.
David, another one Noreen asked is, she mentioned the book Blind Spot, talking about hidden biases. Is there anything else you would recommend?
Blind spots. So when it comes to blind spots, I would throw this out to people is if you feel, especially now, I think we can go a little deeper now in the conversation. Here's a good question. When it comes to blind spots, especially currently today in the current situation and government and people, if we take the individual step back and say, all right, what are certain areas that I don't feel real comfortable in, that I don't understand and have knowledge around? I would do more research around why you feel the way that you feel, and create more concrete data and to support whatever mindset that you have. If there's a question, it's so hard to talk about, but I'm going to try to make it easier. With the current environment today, there's a lot of things that are actually happening. So in order for us to take a step back and look at ourselves first and say, what questions do I have that I don't quite understand? I would recommend doing research around why you feel the way that you feel, that you can make an informed judgment call for yourself, so that you then understand why you're feeling the way that you're feeling, so that when the question comes out, you can actually have an understanding of how to best answer the question that's being asked, or that's being faced with, or that you see in the news, or that the individual has said, or the group has said, or your friend has said, so that you can actually have an informed conversation around the content. But if we don't know what we're talking about, then we start having that reactive kind of mindset that says, okay, I heard this, so I'm going to respond this way, which then creates an argument. We don't want argument, we want inclusion, right? We want inclusion. So that was a really good question. Thank you for that one.
And David, what I might ask is people to put in chat some areas where, and I think we brought a couple of these up, and I'm certainly guilty. We've talked about a couple of the bias in a, European-based sport against females, especially with officials, and we still see that very evidently on especially the road side with the race side of things. But where do you see bias in how you've acted in the community? I'll give you some examples for me. One is, for better or worse, you've got someone there in a really nice team kit on a nice bike versus someone who's riding a cheap bike and, unlabeled kit. You've got to make a decision. You just got a bias that the person in the nice kit and on the nice bike is probably more experienced. And that may be absolutely not the case. That may be the opposite. Plenty of times I've dealt with foreign team managers, and we're here in the U.S. and you have someone comes up who's Belgian or French or Italian. For better or worse, my brain says they're over working in the motherland every week. They're probably more experienced than our folks, and it could be their first day on the job. And I experienced this a bit when I went to race in Europe as an official. I land in Brussels in the heartland of Belgian cycling and go to a Pro Series race that night, and I'm an American who none have ever seen, with a bunch of people who've been doing this and won tour stages, and that can be intimidating. And I think they have a bias against me that is totally unintentional. They were very nice and accepting, and I was able to prove myself, but that was a bias that people had against me. And Noreen has said the same about working as a female commissar on the track. It's very similar. So this isn't all about, to me, and David and I have talked about this isn't always about race. It's not always about that. It's just everything colors our perceptions. And for us as officials, having to make decisions based on the data and the process, as David said, it's super critical to stick to that. The example I've talked about with the NTC is, you have two managers come up who've both done the same thing. One of them's always been really nice and polite to you and thanks you after every race. You got another official who is that pain in the rear every race. Same thing happens to both. Are you going to treat them differently?
That's right. Good point.
I think that's something we all need to think about.
That's so true.
But,
yeah. And Chuck, thank you for saying that. And I'll throw this out to every official here in this call and those that listen, after the recording is complete, is look at what purpose do you have as an official? Why are you an official is one. Number two is how best can you create an inclusive environment based around how best can you create an inclusive environment at the events that you officiate? And how are you partnered with the promoter so that it creates an environment that people want to come to all the time? Yeah, we're going to have differences and we're going to have challenges based on how people react and how they don't act and how they behave and how they don't behave. But going back to the process, if we go back to the process and we understand here's the value that we're bringing as officials, and once that gets out to the broader area of cyclists, more people will come on board and say, okay, this is why officiates officiate. This is why they do it. This is why officials officiate. This is why they do the work that they do. Because if you're not there, we're not having races. And I think they have to truly understand that's the reasoning. That's the purpose of this whole thing. So good point there, Chuck. Good point. Good point.
Yeah, I got a couple direct to me in chat. One is, and David, I'll let you speak a little, so you've been even more involved than I am, but talk about USA Cycling's inclusiveness and D&I efforts. Just a couple of things from my end, and then David, I'll turn it to you. Is number one, I think the most important thing is we've recognized that we have an issue as a sport. We've tried to not just put lip service to it. And, David's one of several people. We have a task force working on it. And David's helped us with a sort of a master strategy plan, I'll say. But some examples are we've worked with Cannondale and EF, the pro team. This is important to them as well. And sorry, I'm going to take down this slide, David. I got asked to do that so we can, I think, so we can see the speakers better. Thanks, Noreen. We worked with EF Cannondale to create a HBCU, that's historically black college and university, and tribal college and university scholarship and basically team sponsorship program in our collegiate. And we're committed to, and they're committed to fund 2 of those schools. If anybody's seen what's happened with a couple of universities getting involved with that, it's really neat stuff. Justin, if you don't mind, if you can throw in chat a couple of the things Mark Janis has put out in that group, that'd be awesome. Yeah. And I think if everybody's seen our board, Rob mentioned it yesterday, our board is a much different looking board of directors than it was just a year ago. And I think that's having great impacts right now. But David, I'll hand it over to you to just talk more on the tactical side about sort of what's been done.
Absolutely. Working with Kelsey. Okay. She's a pretty amazing person. She comes from a background of anti-doping. So it's really unique to be able to work with her holistically around the strategy. So I'll tell you the 5 pieces to the strategy. It's something that when I was working in corporate America, I helped create. I actually didn't help create. I actually created it. So when we look at the business case for diversity, there's a business case to it. Yes, there's diversity that we just talked about, but there's also the business case to it. So there's 5 pieces that we talk about when it relates to business and what we're creating part of the strategic action plan for USAC based on these 5 principles. So number 1 is leadership accountability. We also, from a leadership perspective, leaders have to be very accountable for the actions of diversity and inclusion, how it relates to the business. It's important for us to be able to see how it relates to the work that's already created. This is not a bolt-on process. This is infusing diversity and inclusion in the business. So if we are able to get leadership to understand what the business case is, we can move the needle forward. Number 2, workforce engagement. So there's 3 types of engagement that we know. It's those that are actively engaged, those that are engaged, and those that are disengaged in the work that's actually happening, or actively disengaged. So we have to create these objectives and principles around how do we know who these individuals are. So when it comes down to USAC, there's only, how many folks are in USAC right now? 34-ish, 35?
Yeah.
Yep. So when I got involved with USAC, I'm like, wow, okay, I worked in an organization with 12,000 employees that I had to drive this process through. I only have to deal with 35, okay? This is a perfect opportunity to create some intersection on how does a diversity program and strategic action plan work within the confines of USAC. Those are the 2 pieces. Number 1, it's leadership accountability. Number 2, workforce engagement. Now, number 3, as it relates to this priority perspective, is how do we then create the customer loyalty and retention? Because I'm a customer, right? I race my bicycle too. I still race, right? And other people race their bicycles as well. Is what has happened in COVID last year was everybody wanted to go to Swift, which is true, right? Everybody wanted to go to Swift because it was easy to race their bicycles. So how do we then retain the customers that USAC had prior to COVID? There's a strategy to do that, and it's based around people. That's the 3rd piece. Number 4 is the learning culture. And as officials, what are we learning? You know, what type of learning do we need to ensure that we're staying on top of our game based around the process? Internally, there's some key areas around leadership development, all those other key areas as it relates to learning, and also diversity learning too. I mean, we want to learn more about who we are and what we do and how we can create this intersection and create innovation and create inclusion within an organization. And lastly, and I think we talked about this at the previous, I was listening to what was actually happening prior to the call, was this corporate social responsibility piece as it relates to the community. What partnerships are we building to ensure that, like Chuck was saying, who are we partnering with? How are we going to be able to create these partnerships, historically Black college universities? How do we create this connection between here's where the people are, how can we relate? So those are the 5 principles of the strategy that I'm helping to help build within USAC that we've done some amazing work in the last, I would have to say, 4 months, 4 months. Mm-hmm. And there's more coming because now the entire organization is bubbling up to see here's that it's just not an initiative. I think lots of organizations say it's an initiative. It's not an initiative anymore. It's part of the process in the business perspective to really help USAC grow, not just internally, but externally as well, and which reaches out to you as officials. So that's high level. That's 30,000 foot in a nut frame.
Great, thanks, David. And I think you all heard Rob mentioned yesterday, the Lips Rod camps we're doing with kids. I mean, we are going to be running one of those at every national championships, and we're focused on underserved communities. And there's a certain portion of that program that's going to be funded to go in underserved communities that are non-traditional. The same with the ODA, the Olympic Development Academy we talked about yesterday, is there's a certain amount there to go to people who may have financial difficulties and that our sport could not reach earlier. And if people have ideas about how to apply this to the officials program, certainly let Justin and I know. It'd be something we would be happy to run with. So,
Chuck and David, I'd like to pop in real quick.
Sure.
Going back to Noreen's question, I think she was actually, when we were discussing the blind spots, she was actually referencing the blind spot book, Hidden Biases of Good People.
Yeah.
So she was saying, what do you think about that book? And then also, do you have other suggestions about uncovering bias in book form?
Yeah, I haven't read the book yet. I heard a lot about it. How about I do this? Let me get back to Chuck and I'll come up with some books for you. But that's an excellent question. There's so many key pieces around blind spots on many levels that I can kind of give you some ideas to talk about as well. So what I'll do is I'll send some information to Chuck, and then Chuck can send it out to you. But great question. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, David, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, hold on. One quick question. Can I show something on my screen real quick?
Absolutely. Yeah, you should have the power here.
Yeah, all right, I have this. So, folks, this is the Can you guys see that? Wait, share. Can you see that? Can you see that now? Can you see my screen?
There we go. Yep.
Okay. This here is actually the strategy that we're building, and this is without the objectives that are actually in it. But it talks about the mission and the internal mission and the external mission to grow cycling community, this, that, and the third. So this is actually what the strategy looks like. But there are objectives that we've created over the last couple of weeks that are objectives within each of these framework of those top priorities, and the key business performance metrics and indicators to ensure that we're moving in the right direction. So that's what it looks like. And I think a lot of organizations only do one or two pieces of the priority, but we do all five, which really aligns the business. So it's just a thing for you to think about.
David, I want to point out that I was the first one to fill my section out. So
yeah, that's right, you did. So thank you. So once again, thank you for the time to share some thoughts and really work with you folks to keep this message going. So. Make it a great Sunday, folks.
Great. David, thanks so much for helping out. We'll look forward to getting that information from you and distributing that to our officials. And
sounds good.
With that said, we're headed toward lunch break. So we are going to shutter down. I'm going to leave the room up and put the away slide up until 12 o'clock Mountain Time. That's 36 minutes. And we have a couple last sessions to finish out here. So David, thanks again, and look forward to seeing everybody back in about 36 minutes. Thanks.
Sounds good, folks. Thank you. Yeah. Bye.